An alien mom and her daughter took refuge with me. Now I'm part of their future asterisk. The storm had come fast. Thunder roared across the night sky like distant bombs. Rain poured down in thick sheets, drowning the silence of Jake's lonely farmhouse. The wind howled through the trees, bending them like brittle twigs. Jake had just finished bolting his doors and windows when he heard a loud thud, coming from the old wooden barn outside. He grabbed his flashlight, pulled on his coat, and stepped into the storm. The wind slapped against his face. The rain soaked him in seconds. But the noise, it had sounded like something heavy had fallen. And in this part of the country, where neighbors were miles away and wild animals roamed free, Jake knew better than to ignore strange sounds. He pushed open the barn door slowly. It creaked under the force of the wind. Inside, everything was dark except for one thing. A strange glow. It came from behind the hay bales, faint, soft, bluish-white light, like the moon trapped in a jar. Jake stepped closer, gripping the flashlight tightly like a weapon. As he turned the corner, he froze. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't an animal. It was a woman. She sat in the hay. Her body curled protectively around a small child no older than 3. Her skin shimmered like silver under the light. Long, wet strands of white hair fell over her shoulders. Her clothes were torn and strange, nothing he had ever seen before. But it was her eyes that struck him most. They were wide and full of fear. They glowed faintly like her skin but were filled with something heartbreakingly human. The child in her arms was crying softly, its tiny hands clutching her neck. Jake stepped back, confused and afraid. Who are you?" he whispered. She didn't reply. She only stared. Then, slowly, she raised one hand not toward him, but toward the child, soothing the little one's head with trembling fingers. The child stopped crying, but looked directly at Jake. Its eyes, too, were glowing. Jake's flashlight dropped slightly. This was no ordinary woman. She wasn't from here. She wasn't from this planet. The silence was broken by a soft beep. The woman flinched and quickly pulled a small, broken device from her belt and smashed it with a rock. Sparks flew, then went dark. Jake took a step forward, and she reacted. Not with violence but with a desperate gesture. She placed her hand on her chest, then pressed her fingers together in front of her heart. Then she pointed at the child, and then at Jake. It was like a message. "Please, help us." Jake didn't move. He wasn't a hero. He was a farmer, a man who had left the city behind after losing everything. He came here to forget the world, not to invite it back in. And yet, he couldn't look away from her eyes. She was terrified, cold, soaking wet, injured. And still she clung to the child with every ounce of strength she had. Jake sighed. He moved to the corner, picked up an old wool blanket, and walked back slowly. He knelt beside them and placed the blanket over both. She blinked. Her silver fingers brushed his hand. Jake flinched but didn't pull away. "You can stay here for now," he said, voice low. "But if anyone finds out about you, there'll be trouble." She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She bowed her head in silent gratitude. Jake stood and looked around. No sign of entry, no other damage, just her and the child. He knew he should call someone. The sheriff, the army, anyone. But deep inside, something told him not to. Something told him this wasn't just a crash, this was an escape. And now his barn had become their hiding place. As he closed the barn door behind him, Jake didn't realize the full weight of what he'd done. He hadn't just offered shelter. He had made a choice, one that would change everything. Forever. The next morning came too soon. Jake hadn't slept. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind made him check the barn window again. Was she still there? Was it just a dream? But it wasn't. As the sun broke over the misty fields, he stepped outside, a hot mug of black coffee in one hand, a shaky breath in the other. The storm had passed, but not the tension. Something had changed on his land. Inside the barn, the woman was awake, sitting in the corner with the child still wrapped in the old blanket. Her silver skin looked dimmer in daylight. The child clutched a piece of hay like it was gold. Both stared at Jake without a word. He approached carefully. "I brought food," he said, placing a small plate on the ground. Bread, eggs, and a cup of warm milk. The woman tilted her head, examining the items like she was trying to remember something long forgotten. She didn't reach for it. The child did. Jake was about to speak again when something happened. The child opened its mouth and said, clearly, "Thank you." Jake froze. He hadn't expected a voice. Not from them, and not in perfect English. "What did you say?" he asked slowly. The child blinked. "Thank you," it repeated, then turned to its mother, pointing. "Safe?" Jake stepped back. You can talk. You speak our language." The woman looked confused. She didn't speak, only placed her hand on the child's shoulder gently. She seemed surprised too. Jake sat down on a wooden crate. He was shaking, not from fear anymore but from realization. This child wasn't just alien, it was learning fast. "How? Do you know English?" he asked the child. The child stared for a moment, then pointed at Jake's face. "You." Jake's eyes widened. Had the child copied him, learned from just watching him for a few hours? Before he could ask more, the woman moved closer, as if sensing tension. She held up her hands, palms open, not in defense, but in peace. Jake noticed the thin scars on her wrists, faded, circular, like she'd once been shackled. He spoke gently. "Were you running from someone?" She didn't respond with words, but with her body. She curled around the child protectively again. Her entire posture said it all. "Yes." Jake exhaled slowly. "You're fugitives, aren't you? You escaped." She looked down, silent. Jake didn't need more answers. His gut already knew. This wasn't just a lost traveler. This was a mother running for her child's life. Back in the house, Jake searched the internet for any strange reports, UFO sightings, government alerts, news about falling objects. Nothing. No one had seen them. No one knew they were here. Yet. Later that afternoon, Jake returned to the barn with more food and clean clothes. He also brought a small radio, hoping they'd react. The woman ignored it, but the child touched it gently, and the static faded. Gone. Jake stared. "What did you just do?" The child looked at him with soft eyes and said, "Noise hurts." Jake's breath caught again. This wasn't just about language. This child had empathy, intelligence, understanding. Something deeper than he expected. And then, something happened he didn't expect at all. The woman, silent all this time, reached out and touched Jake's forehead. In that moment, a flash hit him. Not a dream, a memory. Flashes of a tall city of glass, screams, fires in the sky, strange soldiers with masks, a prison, her hands tied. A baby ripped away, then returned, running, crashing, and finally, his barn. Jake gasped and pulled back, stumbling to the ground. His heart pounded. "What was that?" he whispered. The woman's voice finally came, soft and broken, barely above a whisper. "Escape." Then, silence again, but Jake understood. Now, she had shown him her truth. And in doing so she had given him something dangerous. Knowledge. Knowledge that someone, somewhere, didn't want him to have. He looked at them, mother and child, and made a quiet vow he wouldn't let them be taken again. Jake didn't have many rules in life, but one of them had always been this: never trust silence on a farm. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in copper and purple, Jake stood at the edge of the barn, watching. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind had grown still. His dog, Rusty, a quiet old shepherd, began to bark once, then twice, then let out a low growl. He wasn't barking at people. He was staring at the sky. Jake followed his gaze. A silent black triangle hovered above the tree line. Completely still, no sound, no lights. Just hanging there, like a dark tear in the sky. Jake squinted. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't a plane. And it sure as hell wasn't friendly. Suddenly, the triangle twitched and vanished like it had blinked out of existence. Jake grabbed his shotgun out of reflex, not to use it, but to feel like he still had control. Back inside the barn, the woman sat alert, her silver skin slightly glowing. Again, the child was asleep, but she wasn't resting. Her head turned sharply as Jake entered. She had felt it. Jake tried to stay calm. "They're looking for you," he said softly. "Aren't they?" No answer. But the look in her eyes was enough. She already knew. Jake pulled up a chair and sat across from her. He held up a small notepad and began sketching what he saw in the sky. A rough shape of the triangle. The woman nodded slowly. Then, for the first time, she reached into her belt and pulled out a small round object, metallic, cracked, glowing slightly. Jake leaned forward. The object flickered and showed a tiny hologram. It wasn't clear, but it showed a map of space, stars, and a red blinking mark that was moving toward Earth. She pointed to the blinking mark, then pointed at herself, then at the barn. Then she pointed upward. "They followed you, Jake," whispered. The woman's hands trembled. She pressed the object again. The projection changed, now showing a face, a man or something close to one, sharp eyes, dark skin like obsidian, and no mouth. The face simply watched. Jake felt a chill. "Is that the one chasing you?" She looked away. He knew the answer. That night, Jake couldn't sleep again. He sat by the barn with his dog at his feet and a pair of binoculars in his hand. Every sound in the distance felt louder. Every shadow felt like it was watching. At 2:11 a.m., his radio crackled for the first time in weeks. A mechanical voice whispered, "Unauthorized life signature detected. Rural perimeter scan initiated. Maintain civilian distance." Jake stood frozen. They knew something was here. The barn door creaked open behind him. The woman was standing there, child in her arms. Her eyes, usually soft, were now full of steel. She walked past him and stood beneath the stars. Jake followed. She raised her hand to the sky and pressed her fingers into the air like drawing on invisible glass. Suddenly, a faint dome shimmered around the farm, like a barely visible shield flickering into place. "What is this?" Jake asked, stunned. She finally spoke again, her voice still fragile but stronger. "Signal jammed." "For now." Jake blinked. "You can stop them." She shook her head. "Not stop, delay." Then she looked at him with quiet pain. "You hide. You risk life. Why?" Jake didn't answer right away. Then he said simply, "Because I've seen too many run, and no one ever stopped to help them. Not once." The woman looked at him a long time. Then, to his shock, she placed her hand over his heart and whispered something in a language he didn't understand. But it felt like a promise, or maybe a thank you. As they stood together under the shielded sky, Jake realized something deeper. This wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about choosing a side, and he had already chosen. It started with the humming. A low, unnatural vibration pulsed through the ground like distant thunder trapped beneath the soil. Jake felt it first through his boots. Rusty, his dog, growled again and ran inside the barn, whining at the feet of the silver-skinned woman. The stars above were gone, blotted out by something dark and vast. Jake stepped out onto his porch, shotgun in hand, not because it would help, but because he needed to feel brave. The air was still, too still. Even the crickets had fallen silent. Then he saw them. 5 dark figures walked down his gravel road. Not driving, walking, all dressed in black, with helmets shaped like blank faces. No flashlights, no words. They moved like shadows with purpose. They had arrived. Jake whispered into the barn, "You need to go, now." The woman didn't speak. She held the child tighter and looked at Jake. Something passed between them, trust mixed with fear. He opened a trapdoor in the barn floor, an old root cellar he'd never used. "Down here, stay silent, no lights." She nodded, descending quickly, pulling the child into the earth with her. Jake covered the hatch with hay and walked back into the open like nothing was wrong. By the time he reached his porch again, the figures were there. One stepped forward. No badge, no name, just a deep voice beneath the helmet. "We're conducting a biological sweep. You will remain inside until cleared." Jake narrowed his eyes. "Sweep for what?" The figure paused. Then, coldly, "Radiation leak, meteorite. Crash was reported in this grid. We're scanning for contamination." Jake said nothing. He had seen no such crash reported. He knew this was a lie, but pretending to believe it was his only option. "You won't find anything here," he said, slowly. "Just a man, his dog, and a lot of empty space." The figure stepped past him without asking. Jake didn't stop him. 3 entered the barn. 1 walked around the house, scanning with a long, spear-shaped device that gave off a soft beep with Each movement. Inside the barn, a silence heavier than air filled the space. The lead soldier scanned the hay with an infrared lens. Nothing. He passed by the exact spot where the hatch lay hidden, but the dome was still active, masking their heat signatures. One of the figures tilted his head. The skin gun started blinking. Orange, unstable, organic residue detected. It said. Jake felt his heart pound. The figure turned to him. Did you find anything unusual during last night's storm? Jake shook his head. Just broken fence posts and a soaked barn roof. The soldier stared for a long moment, then spoke to someone through a hidden mic. Level to sweep complete. No extraction needed. Tag and move to next grid. Jake exhaled quietly as they turned around and walked out without another word. But just before the last figure stepped through the gate, he stopped. His head turned slightly toward the barn just for a second. He knew, not everything, but something. Then he walked on. Jake didn't wait. As soon as their vehicle disappeared over the hill, he ran back to the barn, pulled open the hatch, and helped the woman out. She looked at him, trembling. They'll come back, Jake said. Next time. They won't knock. The woman closed her eyes, clutching her child. Jake lit a small oil lantern. You can't stay in the barn. Too easy to scan. We'll move you. Where? She asked quietly. Jake looked out toward the tree-covered ridge at the back of his land. I built a storm shelter there years ago, buried under 6 feet of rock. They won't skin that deep. She nodded. The child looked at Jake and whispered, they were bad men. Jake smiled sadly. Yeah, and they'll be back. That night, under cover of darkness, Jake moved them to the old shelter, step by careful step, as he sealed the door and set fresh blankets inside. He knew this was no longer about protection. It was about war. Not of guns and armies, but of secrets. And Jake had just become a soldier in it. The days blurred into one another. Jake brought food at night and left quietly before dawn. He never stayed long. The deeper he got involved, the more dangerous it became for all of them. But something kept pulling him back. It wasn't just duty anymore. It was her. Inside the old stone shelter beneath the ridge, the woman no longer trembled. She had started to smile softly, especially when her child laughed. The boy had begun calling Jake something else now. Safe man. Jake never corrected him. One evening, just as the horizon bled gold into purple, Jake heard something different. Laughter. The child was chasing a moth near the lamp, giggling with joy. The woman sat nearby, her silver skin glimmering gently, her eyes on Jake. Thank you, she said. Jake blinked. Her voice was clearer now. Her accent had softened. She was learning. You're welcome, he replied. You're safe here. For now. She looked at the child, then at Jake. Safe is not home. Jake paused. That word home hit hard. I know, he said. The moment grew quiet. She moved closer, her movements slow, like she didn't want to scare him. Then, without warning, she reached for a pouch and pulled out a tiny glass orb shimmering like frozen stars. She placed it in Jake's hands. He looked at it, confused. What is this? She touched it with one finger. Suddenly, Jake was somewhere else. He stood in a world of blue light. Tall crystal towers, fields of glowing trees. Children ran laughing through floating bridges in the sky, rings of light, like endless rainbows. Then the image changed. Explosions, fire, screaming, soldiers in black armor dragging people into ships, and her chained, pregnant, beaten, the baby taken from her arms. Her tears fell like drops of silver. Jake gasped and dropped the orb. The shelter was quiet again. He looked at her. They did that to you? She nodded. My world is lost. Jake clenched his fists. And the boy? She placed her hand over her heart. He should not be. They call him forbidden. Jake looked at the child, so full of joy, so innocent. His anger flared. They'll never get him. Jake whispered, not while I'm alive. Then she looked up and said the words he never expected. You healed us. Jake stared. Me, I did nothing. She shook her head gently. Your kindness changes everything. Then, slowly, carefully, she placed her hand over his chest again. We are not the same kind, but our hearts beat the same. A strange warmth passed between them. Jake couldn't explain it. His skin tingled where she touched him. The air shimmered faintly round them. The child came closer and placed both hands on Jake's knees. "Now you're family," he said. Jake blinked. "What?" The woman smiled. "Our bond is deeper now." She leaned in and whispered, "We are connected." Jake swallowed hard. Something in his chest ached, something real. And in that moment, he understood. He wasn't just protecting strangers anymore. He was protecting his own. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the trees above. Jake jumped, grabbing his flashlight. Footsteps. Real ones. The shimmer dome was failing. She stood quickly, pulling the child close. Jake grabbed her wrist. "Go to the back tunnel. Now, I'll stop them." "But trust me," Jake said. "It's what families do." She hesitated, then vanished into the dark. Jake turned to face the noise, heart pounding. The bond between them had changed everything. And now, he was willing to bleed for it. Jake ran, his boots crashed against the wet forest floor, heart thundering in his chest like a war drum. The footsteps behind him were growing louder, closer. They weren't ordinary footsteps. They were measured, trained, hunters. He'd led them away. He had no choice. Back at the shelter, the woman and child were hiding beneath the forest in a narrow tunnel dug beneath the old roots. The dome had gone dark hours ago. Its last spark had faded with a soft hum. Jake was buying time, but even time was running out. He stopped near an old dry creek bed and crouched low. He raised his shotgun not to shoot, but to signal. If they followed the sound, they'd think. He was alone. 3 black-clad figures broke through the trees, silent, fast, faceless. Jake fired into the air and took off in the other direction. It worked. They chased, but his breath was fading now. He stumbled behind a fallen log, chest burning. He had nothing left. If they caught him, they'd skin his memories. They'd see everything, her, the child, the hiding place. He pulled the small glass orb from his pocket, the one she gave him. Maybe it wasn't just for memories. Maybe it was also a key. He pressed it to his forehead. In that moment, a soft blue light wrapped around him like a second skin, warm, calm. The pain vanished. The fear faded. Then, he saw her. Not with his eyes but with his mind. She was calling him. In the tunnel, the woman held the boy close. His eyes glowed faintly, sensing the fear in her breath. "He will come back," the boy whispered. The woman didn't answer, but deep inside, she knew their bond was real. A flash lit the sky outside. Then silence. Jake reappeared an hour later, wounded but alive, cuts on his face, mud on his hands, but in his eyes clarity. He looked at her for a long time and said, softly, "We can't keep hiding." She nodded. "I need to know something," he said. She waited. He knelt before her, looking into her eyes. "You said your child wasn't meant to exist. Why?" She looked down, then answered in a voice that trembled with truth. "Because I was made, not born, a creation for war, not for love." Jake's eyes widened. "You're a clone?" She nodded. "My kind was built to serve, but I broke the order. I ran. I loved. And now I carry that crime inside me." Jake stood, stunned. "But he's alive, and he's beautiful." She smiled sadly. "Yes, and they fear what he might become." Jake looked at them both. Then came the moment. She stepped forward, took his hand, and placed it gently on her stomach. "You feel that?" she whispered. Jake paused, and then felt it, a faint second pulse. Not hers, not the boy's, a new one. He pulled back, eyes wide. "You're pregnant." She nodded. "Half me, half you." Jake couldn't breathe. We didn't." She looked into his eyes. "Not in your way. Our bond is deeper, emotional, not physical. Our kind joins souls. Your protection, your sacrifice, it created life inside me." Jake stepped back. It was too much. Too fast. Too impossible. "You're saying I have to choose now." She nodded once. "Stay and become part of us, or leave, forget, go back to your world." Jake looked at the child, asleep on a bed of moss. He looked at her, tired, brave, and glowing faintly in the dim light. And then he looked at his own hands. They were no longer shaking. He had already made the choice days ago. He just hadn't said it out loud. Until now. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Her eyes filled with tears. He walked to her, slowly, and said, You're not alone anymore. And if this child carries something new, then let them carry hope." They stood in silence, a silence filled with something powerful. The beginning of a new species, the start of something Earth was never ready for. And yet, here it was. Alive in a forest, protected by a farmer, brought together not by fate but by choice. The morning sun broke through the forest, touching the trees with gold. For the first time in weeks, Jake wasn't running. He stood still beside a woman not of this world and a child who might one day change it. His old flannel shirt was torn, boots scuffed, hair tangled from too many nights sleeping on dirt, but his eyes held something new. Peace, not the kind that came from silence, the kind that came from acceptance. The forest around them was no longer just a hiding place. It was a home. For now. Inside the makeshift shelter, the woman gently laid the boy down to sleep. She hummed softly a song from her world. The sound carried through the moss-lined cave like wind and crystal. Jake stood at the entrance, watching her. She turned to him and spoke, her voice now smooth and full. "He dreams of flying." Jake smiled. Then one day, he should fly. There was a pause. She walked to him slowly, her hand resting over her stomach. "And this one carries your strength." Jake looked down at her hand. "Is that a good thing?" She nodded. "Strength with heart is rare, but it makes new futures." Jake exhaled. "Then we'll build one." Suddenly, the child stirred in his sleep. His body shimmered and for a brief moment lifted into the air, just a few inches, then gently floated back down. Jake's mouth fell open. "He's not normal." The woman's smile was calm. "No, he's better." That night, under a blanket of stars, Jake lit a small fire. The crackling wood was the only sound, until the child spoke. "Are we safe now?" Jake looked at the sky, still scanning, still cautious, and replied, "Not completely, but safer than yesterday." The boy nodded. "Will others like us come?" Jake looked at the woman. She closed her eyes and reached into the stars with her thoughts, a signal, a beacon. Then she opened her eyes. They heard. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Her answer came slowly. "Now, we prepare, not just to hide, not to run, but to welcome." Jake sat still. That single word held so much weight. Welcome, to Earth, to him, to us. Weeks passed. They built a new shelter, deeper, stronger, invisible to all sensors. Jake taught the child how to plant seeds, build fires, and read the wind. The woman taught Jake how to sense danger before it arrived. She showed him how emotions had colors and how trees responded to kindness. Then, one silent dawn, 3 shadows appeared beyond the trees. Tall, elegant, not human. They didn't come with weapons. They came with light. The woman stood first, holding her child's hand. Jake stepped beside her. The strangers bowed. The woman whispered, "They're not from my world, but they heard our call, and they believe in the bond." Jake understood. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something vast. Something born not in a lab or a throne room, but in a wooden barn. On a stormy night between a farmer and a fleeing mother, the child looked up at Jake and said, "You're my dad, right?" Jake knelt beside him. "Yeah, I guess I am." The boy smiled. "Then I'll protect you too." From the darkness of the stars, from the pain of the past, a new world had begun. Rooted in compassion, courage, and choice. Not everyone was ready for what was coming. But Jake was, and so was she. And so was the future. Born not of blood, but of something deeper, a bond beyond worlds.